Christopher Nolan, the man who's single-handedly taken over the 21st century film landscape, has wowed audiences with his cerebral blockbusters, great visuals and unique scores. I won't lie, I wasn't looking forward to a Nolan marathon because from the handful of his films I had seen, which looking back now were mainly his weaker ones, I just wasn't convinced he was a filmmaker for me. But you know what, after a deep dive into his filmography, I'm pretty sold. I will still admit now as a Nolan fan that he is a pretty easy filmmaker to make fun of and pull some of his weaker films apart, but some of his better films are undeniably some of the best released in the last 20 years. So let's get right into it. Which movies have earned him the title of one of the best directors of all time, and which have attracted his haters? Let's start with Following. Following is a cute low-budget thriller for sure, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't entertained by the three main characters, but if there's one Nolan film that will just completely wash over you and be forgotten the day after you watch it, it's this one. Unsurprisingly, this movie screams directorial debut, with questionable dialogue, twists and turns that lack any sense of shock or satisfaction, and awkward performances. The story may start out pretty interesting, but it doesn't feel like it goes anywhere gratifying or beyond its initial concept in its hour-long runtime. Much like Fear and Desire for Stanley Kubrick, this is an interesting watch to see the birth of this kind of filmmaking happening right before your eyes, but there's barely anything great to unpack beyond that initial intrigue. Tenet. A lot of my issues with this movie comes from the fact that with Tenet, you can feel Nolan trying to make a Nolan film. This guy has put himself on quite the pedestal with his high concept movies over the last 20 years, and Tenet is his most obvious example of desperately reaching to top what he's done before, and failing to do so. To steal a quote from Jurassic Park, it seems in crafting Tenet, Nolan was so preoccupied with whether or not he could do it, he didn't stop to think if he should. The whole time inversion thing is something that fundamentally can't work on screen in a consistent way, which wouldn't be a problem if the intention with Tenet was to create a fun action movie, but I think the last thing Nolan wants anyone to do in this film is turn their brains off. If he spent nearly as much time on crafting interesting characters or emotional stakes as he did on the hard-to-hear, mindless and relentless exposition dumps, I think we'd have a pretty good movie. Honestly, if there was a 3-hour cut of this film with decent character development, then I'd probably enjoy it, because I can't take the beauty of the visuals and score for granted, and they deserve to be attached to a better movie. But as it stands now, Tenet doesn't give me anything I don't think Nolan's already done way better before. Insomnia. Despite not having anything massively wrong with it, Insomnia is held as the ugly stepchild of Nolan's career, and I think that mainly comes down to the writing and the execution. While it may be more narratively coherent than even some of the films higher on this list, it's so bland in its presentation that it fails to have any sort of identity of its own. This is just one of those movies where everything is fine. The acting is fine, the plot is fine, the score is fine, and when you've got a discography as unique and boundary pushing as Nolan, being fine is one of the worst things you can be. The Dark Knight Rises. If you ever want to see what a film made by someone who really doesn't give a shit about the film they're making, The Dark Knight Rises is the place to go. Nolan wrote himself into a corner with both the ending and the critical reception for Dark Knight, and then on top of that he pushed this production back to make Inception, and then rushed it to make Interstellar. Don't get me wrong, I don't envy the task of following such a beloved film that provides a satisfying ending in and of itself, but I'm not sure if Nolan even tried. Besides the performances, no aspect of this film feels like it was made out of any sort of care or attention. Instead, it feels like Nolan came to it with a few cool ideas and then threw a bunch of shit together to make it work. That's what it feels like watching The Dark Knight Rises, a bunch of shit happening, and not all that well made shit either. The poor sound editing, fight scenes and numerous plot holes have been talked about to death. And honestly, none of this would bother me if what I was watching was entertaining, but other than a handful of good moments, this is kind of a convoluted mess. Interstellar. I've spoken before about how a movie can tick all of the boxes you usually ask for in a film and still not quite connect with you, and Interstellar is one of those for me. That's not to say nothing in this movie works for me, because there are moments I genuinely love in it, the takeoff sequence where Cooper says goodbye to his family and the video messages scenes being some of my favourites from Nolan's discography. Not only that, but it also goes without saying that this is one of the most beautiful films you will ever see, and the sound design plays a huge part in how epic it all is to watch unfold. I've always struggled to pinpoint exactly what it is that doesn't work for me in this film, but I think what it all comes down to is how underwhelming some of this is by the end of it. Knowing Nolan's tendencies for twists and turns, I saw the big twist coming from a mile away, and the entire emotional climax of the film is massively cut short in the film's final moments. I guess what it all comes down to is, would I watch it again? And yeah, why not? But let's say I won't particularly be in any rush for this one. Batman Begins. Looking back on it, Batman Begins is an extremely important film in reviving and then kickstarting the superhero genre, and it's clear to see why. One thing I think people sleep on Nolan for is his character studies. Cobb in Inception, Angier and Borden in The Prestige, Leonard in Memento, and Bruce Wayne in Batman Begins. I feel like I understand Bruce Wayne way more in this movie than honestly any other Batman movie, the two Dark Knight films included. Nolan and Goya's writing goes beyond the campiness of the superhero genre and shows me a human being, one that I can relate to and feel sympathy for, and this is easily Bale's best performance as Batman. So while it is a pretty satisfying Batman story, my main problems with this one surprisingly comes from the direction. There's a lot of awkward cuts and movements that don't translate well in the final film. You've obviously got the infamous shaky fight scenes, but there's also moments where characters that were nowhere to be seen randomly pop up in a scene out of nowhere, and every death or knockout is presented by a shot of the person in motion, a quick cutaway, and then bam, they're instantly laying motionless on the floor like they've been laying there for 5 minutes. It's good knowing now that Nolan improved over time though, and Batman Begins is still a solid entry both in Nolan's career and the Batman canon. Dunkirk. Dunkirk is a film made for lovers of cinema as it uses purely cinematic language to create a tense and ugly vision of war. The reason this works so well is because it's just Nolan doing what he does best for an hour and 40 minutes, cutting out all of the shit and getting right down to the set pieces, and when he's at his best, no one does them better. It feels like it reveals just enough character through action to keep me invested, and the form Nolan takes to tell this story, in the same vein as something like 2001, lends itself to a film where the experience itself is enough, and deep characterization can take a backseat. This is basically just as immersive as movies get, pulling out so many emotions from its viewer without ever having to hinge on typical plot structure or character. The Dark Knight. Listen, you all know what works about The Dark Knight. I'm not going to be the millionth guy to tell you how good Heath Ledger is or how tense the ferry sequence is. Any positive for this film you've ever seen, I probably agree with. So when I tell you why The Dark Knight isn't in my top 2 where it sits for most people, that doesn't for 1 second mean I don't love all the individual pieces of it. See, that's the main thing for me, the individual pieces. Watching the bits from The Dark Knight, in my opinion, is a way better experience than watching the movie as a whole. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Some Nolan films are like a jacket made of the finest material on the market, but stitches made of cobwebs, and this film is the finest example of that. Honestly, ever since I was a kid, I've found the editing and structure of The Dark Knight kind of off-putting. Nolan manages to craft amazing action sequences or moments of tension every 10 minutes or so, but seems to severely struggle to connect them together in a way that feels emotionally coherent. I understand Nolan wants to capture a feeling of chaos and unpredictability, but I feel like something like No Country for Old Men, while it doesn't have any individual moments that top The Dark Knight, captures that feeling while still feeling coherent and satisfying as a narrative. Did that make any sense at all? Ugh. The Dark Knight is great, I mean that, but I really do think it would have benefited from slowing down, enjoying itself with its characters, and not rushing so much from set piece to set piece. Memento. Jesus, what a debut. Not only is it baffling to comprehend a movie with this structure even working, but the fact that it's presented in a way that's so easy to get behind by a guy that had never made a film of this caliber before, come on man. What I appreciate most about this guy is his willingness to bend the traditional rules of cinema to immerse the audience in the world of the story he's telling, and what better place to look than Memento. I will admit it's a little difficult to fully digest on a first watch because of how much there is to swallow, but unlike something like Tenet, Memento provides enough character and entertainment value within its narrative that putting it on for a second watch is no chore. With Guy Pearce's performance, the direction, and some of the writing at times, it's good to see Nolan having fun at the same time as presenting something mind-blowing. And that's truly what Memento is, a thrill ride from beginning to end that's both impossible to predict and look away from. The Prestige. How the fuck Nolan managed to make a film about two competing magicians, one of the most tense and unpredictable narratives I've ever sat through, will always astound me. The Prestige is a magic trick unfolding in front of your eyes, again fully immersing you in the story of the film, playing out in a way where there's always something the audience is trying to figure out and never at any point answering more questions than it's asking. Although on the surface it's way more smaller scaled than a lot of Nolan's work, the plotting and execution is just as complex and honestly all the more gratifying. Over its 2-hour runtime, I felt like I'd grown to really know the main two characters, who are both performed brilliantly might I add, making a single magic trick feel just as high stakes as the whole world ending in Tenet. So with its characterization, quirky presentation and majestic writing, every twist and turn hits you like a ton of bricks. I just don't feel like talking about it can do it any justice. If you haven't seen The Prestige, just go and watch it, so you can experience its genius for yourself. You've probably figured out what number 1 is by now, and going into this list I thought nothing could top it, and while that did turn out to be true, The Prestige got pretty damn close. Inception. At this point, Inception is just beyond analysis. It's one of those movies that can only really be described as an experience, giving the best of everything a Nolan movie usually promises to offer. Every element of filmmaking is on top form in Inception, and I mean every element. The cinematography is stunning, the concept is original and complex without feeling too convoluted, and the writing and acting bring your attention away from how much exposition is here by adding charm and dimension to the cast of characters. With this movie, Nolan managed to tick all the boxes a lot of his weaker films tend to leave unchecked. A large reason many, including myself, make fun of his films is because a lot of the time they can be too bogged down in exposition and practicality while failing to provide more earnest character moments and a sense of fun. Yet I get both of those with Inception. It really is a rollercoaster to watch, providing spectacle, laughs, cries, innovative action, and as much as I hate to use the word, I think this movie really is a masterpiece. So there you go, there you have it, that's my Nolan ranking. Let me know how you guys would rank his films in the comments below, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you soon.